Smochen jurein mi di harna iri o ai o ele harna iri o.
Order, please. Before we begin with the daily routine, the subject of this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic. Therefore, be it resolved that this government release the Cape Breton Public Housing Asbestos Report. And that will begin the adjournment of business today. Now I'll commence with the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabukto.
Down. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I wish to present a petition which has been signed by 547 persons, the operative clause of which reads, therefore, we, the undersigned, petition the Minister of Justice in his role as Attorney General to order an inquiry into the wrongful death of Stephen Giffen under the Fatality Inquiries Act. And I, Mr. Speaker, have affixed my name to this petition as well. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if I may as well make an introduction.
Petition is tabled, and please do the introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the members of the House to the presence in the West Gallery of Mr. Cyril Giffen, who is the father of Stephen Giffen, the gentleman who is the subject of the petition. Mr. Giffen unfortunately lost his son as a result of a fight in a bar in Halifax in 1999, and has felt ever since then not satisfied with the process of trials, so that in addition to the deep sorrow of losing his son, he's had difficulty in dealing with the legal process, hence the petition. I wonder if Mr. Giffen could rise and receive a welcome from the members of the House.
Welcome to our guests and all members in the gallery. Petition. The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have an opportunity, and I beg leave to introduce a petition. Mr. Speaker, with the operative clause, we support the decision of the Halifax Regional School Board to make a new high school for Eastern Passage a priority. Discussions in government are currently taking place. A decision will be made in 2006. We strongly encourage the Department of Education to endorse the recommendation of the school board to build a high school in the community by 2011. And Mr. Speaker, I have affixed my signature, and it's one of 4,000 people who have signed the petition.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, in advance of tabling the report, the Nova Scotia Community College Annual Report, I would like to request permission to make an introduction.
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery, I would like to draw attention to the members of the House to Joan MacArthur Blair, President of NSCC. I'm very pleased to be working with Dr. MacArthur Blair to ensure Nova Scotia students have their skills they need to succeed in our labour market. I would also like to welcome 2 NSCC graduates and entrepreneurs who helped to produce the report. Aaron Harpel is a graphic designer who graduated in 2003 and now has his own company called Hammerhead Design. And Catherine Neely is a photographer who graduated in 2003. Mr. Speaker, when this report is distributed to stakeholders across the province, including every member of this House, NSCC's new strategic plan will be included as part of the package. Dr. MacArthur Blair tells me that she and her colleagues at NSCC will welcome every opportunity to talk about this plan, the future of NSCC, and the future of Nova Scotia. I would like Dr. MacArthur Blair, Mr. Harpel, and Ms. Neely to rise and receive a warm welcome from the House. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the report to the community, 2006, Nova Scotia Community College.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to stand to share an important update about the Deep Panook offshore energy project. Today, Encana filed its development plan application for Deep Panook with the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. This is great news for continued development in Nova Scotia's offshore. Nova Scotia's offshore contains more than 40 trillion cubic feet of natural gas potential. We have established infrastructure and we have proven petroleum systems. As the Deep Panuke project moves forward, it means renewed interest in our offshore and new exposure to our oil and gas potential, Mr. Speaker. Most importantly, it means more jobs and more opportunities for Nova Scotians. To ensure that Nova Scotians benefit, we have signed with Encana and OSEA. This agreement outlines the framework, including employment expectations, industrial benefits, royalties, and R&D funding for development of the Deep Panuke natural gas field in offshore Nova Scotia. This agreement provides Nova Scotians with enhanced royalties, guaranteed personal hours of employment, and jobs related to project engineering, design and procurement, fabrication, and manufacturing. It also includes a binding arbitration process in case of disputes. As this project moves ahead to the production stage, it also means new royalty dollars that will benefit Nova Scotians through better roads, new schools, and more money, Mr. Speaker, for health care. Mr. Speaker, I also want to mention the new public review process. This single window approach will bring together two commissioners, one appointed by the CNSOPB and one by the National Energy Board. This streamlined process will continue to provide the necessary review of the project while avoiding unnecessary delays. This process will protect the public interest and environment and at the same time meet the legitimate needs of businesses for a hearing that is efficient and timely. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to continued development of the Deep Panuke project, and I look forward to the day when natural gas from the Deep Panuke field comes ashore, Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this is an interesting statement today, Mr. Speaker, because as you as Speaker and in another life, we're deeply involved in this discussions with around Deep Panuke, and we want to thank you for that too, in your role in that, Mr. Speaker. But it is, by and large, a good news statement. The only problem is we don't know whether the deputy agrees or disagrees, and we'll find that out later, I guess. It was going on NEB today. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm really happy about is in this statement is the idea of the streamlining of the process, that is done, that clearly that the stakeholders know where to go. It's not revisiting the same item time after time, that proponents can go forward. We also have to be, though, mindful that we don't blur the line of regulator and promoter, that we know what that can lead to. So we have to be ever conscious of that, Mr. Speaker. But by and large, you know, this would be greeted as a good news event for this province. That is, we can garner as much Nova Scotia content as possible is good news. That we have to help that industry grow in as much as we can, and we appreciate that not all components of this magnitude can be done here in the province. But it's very important that what can be done is done in here, and that's where we have to support local industry, Mr. Speaker. So by and large, I have to say that this is a good news statement today. I know it's a reaffirmation of statements made earlier, but we look forward for this project going forward and helping Nova Scotians to prosper. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly as the energy critic for our caucus, we're pleased to see that Encana is moving one step closer by filing its development plan application with the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board to the development of the Deep Panuke oil field. We're also pleased with the earlier announcement of some of the benefits that will be there. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's ironic the timing of this announcement would take place today, because I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that for residents in the Strait area, they've got a lot of questions to ask today, and it's not about Encana. It's about Department of Energy. It's about the Deputy Minister of that department and some of her comments that she has made, which we'll certainly have an opportunity to hopefully get answers from her superior, the Minister of Energy, later on, and explain exactly why we have a Deputy Minister who has appeared to have given up on one of the most significant developments for our offshore industry and for energy here in this province by her statements, which in essence has said that the province and department is abandoning any hopes of developing an LNG facility in the Strait area in my riding of Richmond County, which will benefit not only our whole province, but benefit the ridings of the Premier, the ridings of the Minister of Transportation, and the riding of the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. And Mr. Speaker, how we are now seeing as a province exactly what happens when Tories, governments, start rewarding Tories with important civil service positions. We saw it with Heather Foley-Melvin being appointed to Conserve Nova Scotia, and now we see it with the appointment of Alison Scott as the Deputy Minister of Energy. Now let's look back. Let's look back, Mr. Speaker. We had a Deputy Minister of Energy after undergoing a search where we found someone from out west, which was known as an expert in energy. That's who we had here as a Deputy Minister. Speaker, you'd know who he was. All of a sudden, that member left, Mr. Speaker. And when that member left, who did we put in as an expert in the Department of Energy? A friend of the Premier at the day, Alison Scott. What was her experience in energy? Absolutely none. Just like Heather Foley-Melvin's experience in Conserve Nova Scotia. So now we're seeing the fruits of Tory patronage here in this province. So, Mr. Speaker, this news is good news for our province. We hope that the development will happen. But there's certainly many more questions that need to be addressed about the statements made by the Deputy Minister and the actions of the Department of Energy and the actions of this government in regards to the development of LNG here in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Halifax will host one of the largest international conferences in Atlantic Canada, the Global Microcredit Summit, November 12th to 15th. Whereas the summit will be an opportunity to celebrate the first decade of the Microcredit Summit campaign and the extraordinary goal of helping 100 million of the world's poorest families lift themselves out of poverty. Whereas the province is proud to welcome over 2,000 delegates from 100 countries to Nova Scotia and congratulate them for their part to help make a difference to the world's less fortunate people. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the extraordinary accomplishments of the Global Microcredit Summit as they work to help those in need. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas one of the Red Cross's 7 fundamental principles is humanity, and whereas the Canadian Red Cross Atlantic region celebrates this principle each year by honouring a citizen with its humanitarian award. And whereas last night the award is presented posthumously to Mr. Charles Keating, who passed away last November, but who will always be remembered both for the success he made of himself in business and more so for the priceless contributions he made, big and small, within his beloved community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank the Canadian Red Cross for continuing to highlight the achievements of caring Nova Scotians and thank them for honouring a great friend of this province, whose legacy of kindness will soon not be forgotten, Mr. Charles Keating. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice. Passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day as we move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the IWK Health Centre is fundraising for a 4-year, $48 million children's site redevelopment project to which government is contributing $36.6 million. And whereas Tim Hortons founder and philanthropist Ron Joyce visited the hospital yesterday and decided on the spot to double his already generous donation of $1 million. And whereas a $2 million donation will be earmarked for the construction of modern pediatric operating suites to allow the hospital to keep up with emerging surgical technology, facilitate newer surgical techniques, and enhance education for students and staff. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House show appreciation for Mr. Ron Joyce for his very generous investment in the health of Nova Scotians' children. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
It's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. Whereas Councillor Sue Utek was recently elected as HRM's Deputy Mayor by her council colleagues and is the first woman in HRM history to hold that office. Whereas Councillor Utek represents the residents of North West Arm, South End, Halifax, winning the by-election in 1999 and being re-elected in October 2000. And whereas Sue Utek's late husband, Larry, also served as Deputy Mayor and was a champion of the Harbour Solutions Project. Therefore, be it resolved, all members congratulate Sue Utek on being elected as Deputy Mayor and wish her every success in her new responsibility. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
The request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. David Barry, who together with his wife Julianne and young children Caitlin and Tom, secured a work permit from the federal government and moved to Nova Scotia from Ireland in March by way of the Nova Scotia nominee program. And whereas just a few days later, after arriving in our province, David, using his knowledge of first aid, took immediate action that resulted in saving the life of local resident Barbara Danzer. And whereas David's heroics were recognized last Saturday by St. John Ambulance, which awarded him the Presidential Citation Life-Saving Award. Therefore, be it resolved that all members salute David Barry for his quick thinking and life-saving action and thank he and his family for choosing to make Nova Scotia their new home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas mining supports the livelihood of thousands of Nova Scotians and contributes to the economic development of communities across our province, and whereas the Mining Matters for Nova Scotia 2006 conference is now underway in Halifax and provides a wealth of information to industry members and the public. Whereas management and staff in the Mineral Resources branch of the Department of Natural Resources continue to apply their professional skills in support of the mining industry in Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the hard work that has gone into the preparation of this year's Mining Matters Conference, and please accept the Department's invitation to attend sessions that may be of interest to them. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas we have many excellent nurses in this province who go above and beyond their duty, and whereas the Cape Breton District Health Authority recently announced the recipients of its 2006 Cape Breton Cancer Symposium Community Award for exceptional contributions to cancer prevention and care in the community. And whereas there are two nurses who have been site coordinators of Inspiring, try that again, Mr. Speaker, whereas there are two nurses who have been site coordinators of the Inspiring Look Good, Feel Better program since it started in 1999. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Carolyn Richards and Phyllis Ball for their efforts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this summer, Travel and Leisure magazine's readers told the world something Nova Scotians already know, that Cape Breton Island is the world-class vacation destination, and whereas that magazine ranked Cape Breton as the 4th best island destination in the world and the best in continental USA and Canada, and whereas another well-recognized magazine, Condé Nast Traveler, has just surveyed its readers who rank Cape Breton Island in their top 10 best islands to visit in North America. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize how this high-profile praise of Cape Breton Island boosts the marketing efforts that tourism partners are making together to bring more visitors to Cape Breton and Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the village of Little Dover in the municipality of the district of Guysborough has undertaken a test pilot project to improve their septic waste management through innovative partnerships and thinking. And whereas this pilot project can use state-of-the-art and highly efficient sewage dewatering technology to filter and remove only solid septage, and accordingly reduce the transportation, human resources, and recovery time required to achieve positive impacts on the local groundwater and other environmental assets. And whereas this project is a result of a successful partnership between provincial and municipal governments, the international environmental industry, and individual Nova Scotia homeowners committed to exploring environmental solutions, therefore be resolved that all members of this House join the people of Nova Scotia in congratulating the village of Little Dover, the municipality of the district of Guysborough, and other project proponents for the example and challenge they have set before Nova Scotia municipalities to embrace modern septic waste management for the benefit of all Nova Scotians. I request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 3 Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources staff traveled to British Columbia this past summer to help battle forest fires. And whereas incident commanders Glenn Terrace of Antigonish, Alistair Patterson of Cox Heath, and Jacob Penny of Bridgewater supported firefighting efforts across southeastern British Columbia. And whereas the Department of Natural Resources is proud to live up to its commitment to provide mutual aid to other provinces in time of need, knowing full well that they are ready to respond in kind if and when we need assistance. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the professionalism of our Nova Scotia firefighting crews, and in particular, Mr. Terrace, Mr. Patterson, and Mr. Penny. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, in advance of introducing my bills, I would like your permission to make an introduction.
Please do.
I turn the attention of members to the East Gallery, where we have just 2 distinguished municipal politicians with us today. Russell Walker of HRM, who is the new president of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. Warden Lloyd Hines of the District of Guysborough, who was the co-chair of the committee which did the work so that this assessment agency, which is reflected in this bill I'm going to introduce, his work and that of his colleagues. So I'd like to recognize, they're standing there, and I'd ask the host to recognize them. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish the Property Valuation Services Corporation.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish the Property Valuation Services Corporation.
Bill 94, entitled An Act to Establish the Property Valuation Services Corporation.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 95, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to repeal Chapter 11 of the Acts of 2005, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to repeal Chapter 11 of the Acts of 2005, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act.
Bill 96, entitled an Act to repeal Chapter 11 of the Acts of 2005, the Petroleum Products Pricing Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authority Act.
Here, here. Good stuff.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Bill 97, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
Bill 98, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the MLA for Glace Bay, beg leave to enter an act titled to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
The Honourable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Bill 99, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2000, the Health Authorities Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Inverness Oran is well known as an independent, family-owned community newspaper that has succeeded thanks to hard work and dedication to serving its readers. And whereas the publisher of the Oran, Frank MacDonald, could have been well satisfied with the accomplishments of the newspaper. And whereas instead Frank MacDonald wrote a novel entitled A Forest for Callum, which has been nominated for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Frank MacDonald of Inverness County for the recognition that he has already won for his first novel, A Forest for Callum. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Charles V. Keating was a well-known and well-respected businessman, civic leader, and philanthropist who served on more than 40 boards and charities throughout his illustrious career. Whereas among his many awards and honours, Mr. Keating received his Doctor of Laws degree from St. Francis Xavier University, was inducted into the Order of Canada in 2003, and into the Nova Scotia Business Hall of Fame in 2004. whereas Mr. Charles V. Keating is being posthumously honoured by the Canadian Red Cross, Nova Scotia region, with the 2006 Humanitarian Award in recognition of Mr. Keating's spirit of humanity and lifelong dedication to bettering our province. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the accomplishments and achievements of Mr. Charles V. Keating and congratulate his family on being presented with the 2006 Humanitarian Award. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the doors of Windsor's new healthcare facility, the Hants Community Hospital, were opened on the first week of May 1976 and later officially opened by Queen Elizabeth II in mid-July 1976. And whereas the Hants Community Hospital has played and continues to play an integral role in the lives of some 22,000 people in Hantsport, Windsor, and Greater West Hants, and whereas today the staff and local community in general are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the hospital with the grand opening of the Gifts of Hope Art Gallery. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge both current and former dedicated staff of the Hants Community Hospital for their tireless work over the past 30 years, while anniversary celebrations are underway today with the opening of the Gifts of Hope Art Gallery. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Doris MacDonald, a war bride married for over 60 years, lost the love of her life, her husband Alan MacDonald, this past weekend. And whereas Doris and Alan were the heart and soul of Royal Canadian Legion Branch 15 and spearheaded Remembrance Day ceremonies, and whereas Doris and Alan MacDonald loved to dance and share their wartime memories with the youth in the Waterford area. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly extend our deepest sympathies to Doris MacDonald on the loss of the love of her life, Alan, and thank the MacDonalds for their tireless work on behalf of all veterans. I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the IWK Health Centre provides quality care to women, children, youth, and families in the Maritime provinces and beyond, and whereas Tim Hortons has been providing well-brewed coffee and donuts to Canadians since 1964, and whereas yesterday, upon seeing the excellent work by staff, Tim Hortons founder Ron Joyce donated doubling his initial contribution from $1 million to $2 million for the IWK Health Centre in Halifax. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate the IWK and recognize Ron Joyce for his generous donation by contributing to the redevelopment plans needed at the hospital and the well-being of children. I would ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
There's a request for waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Stellarton campus of the Nova Scotia Community College recently completed the construction of its new daycare centre, and whereas the newly opened Kinder campus allows more Nova Scotia Community College students to access convenient childcare while they pursue their post-secondary education, and whereas owner and longtime New Glasgow daycare operator Janice Rehill started staggered admissions in August in preparation for the college's opening on September the 5th, and will offer any additional spaces to residents of Pictou County. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their warm wishes to NSCC Stellarton for its initiative. Such planning and accommodating means students can pursue their academic goals with more ease, and NSCC can serve its community in even more ways than before. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. Honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas art is an expression of culture that helps us to understand our world and ourselves, and whereas the exposure to art uplifts and provokes thought and creative expression, and whereas on October 21st, 2006, Kennecook Community Vision Society held the grand opening of its art gallery, The Place Near and Far. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate the Kennecott Community Vision Society on their grand opening of the place near and far and wish them every success in showing the creations of artists to the public. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass it without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Regional Municipality recently implemented a program this past year that exempted veterans with designated license plates from parking fees in locations where a fee is required. And whereas the Halifax Regional Municipality established this program to commemorate the brave men and women who served their country and to recognize 2005 as Year of the Veteran, and whereas this exemption expired on March 31st of this year, and other provinces such as Ontario continue to exempt veterans from parking fees in their province, therefore be resolved that members of the House of Assembly encourage the government to begin consultations with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities to evaluate the possibility of exempting Nova Scotians veterans from paying parking fees in location where a fee is required. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice, please.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, where 1 in 10 Canadians, young or old, suffer from some form of arthritis. And whereas on October 15, 2006, the Arthritis Society Joints in Motion Society sponsored a 42.2-kilometer marathon, which was held in Amsterdam, Holland. And whereas Laurie LeBlanc, teacher from Meadowfields Community School in Yarmouth, as a part of the Canadian team of 30 runners, 7 from Nova Scotia, participated and completed the marathon in 4 hours and 14 minutes, raising a total of $6,454.33 for the Arthritis Society. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating and thanking Laurie LeBlanc for her hard work and dedication to the Arthritis Society. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 26, 2006, I had the pleasure of attending the 24th Annual General Meeting and Awards Night for the Boys and Girls Club of East Dartmouth. And whereas awards were presented to outstanding citizens involved in making the Boys and Girls Club a success, and whereas through the efforts of the award recipients and many others, the Boys and Girls Club is able to provide a safe, supportive place where children and youth can experience new opportunities, overcome barriers, build positive relationships, and develop confidence in the skills of life. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Boys and Girls Club of East Dartmouth Award Night recipients and thank them for their continued support. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Trans-County Transport Society provides people with disabilities or low-income affordable transportation, allowing their mobility and limiting their dependence on others. And whereas when Debbie Decker, the General Manager of Trans-County Transport Society, took over, they were on the brink of collapsing with old vehicles which broke down and were costly to run with one paid driver and several volunteers. And whereas through hard work they have secured contracts with the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board and the Mountain Lee Lodge in Bridgetown, which has allowed them to grow to include 7 paid drivers, 1 dispatcher, a wheelchair-accessible minivan, 2 large passenger vans, and a minibus. Therefore, be it resolved, members of the House recognize the service that Trans-County Transportation Society provide to the community and wish them every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the St. Francis Xavier University ex-women's rugby team captured the Monolux Trophy at the Canadian Inter-University Sport Women's Rugby Championship, and whereas the ex-women have been the Atlantic Conference champions the last 9 years, and with this win, became the first maritime team to claim the CIS Women's Rugby Championship and the first CIS Championship in women's sports at St. FX University. Whereas in the final game, the ex-women's Kim Armstrong and Michelle Burks kicked a convert and added a penalty goal as they beat Guelph 10-5. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in congratulating the ex-women's rugby team on their outstanding win and wish them continued success. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Marc-Andre McLeod of Pictou County's Royal Canadian Air Cadets, Flight 374, has been presented with 2 high awards, and whereas Marc-Andre McLeod has earned the Wyman Young Award, which goes to the top power flight air cadet candidate in Nova Scotia, and also was awarded the Army, Navy, Air Force Veterans Association Medal as the top power flight candidate in Atlantic Canada. And whereas Marc-Andre McLeod is a Pictou Academy student in his final year and has plans to attend flight college in order to fulfill his dreams of becoming an airline pilot. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Marc-Andre McLeod on the receipt of the Wyman Young Award, the Army, Navy, Air Force Veterans Association Medal for his hard work, dedication, and determination, and wish him great success and clear skies in his future endeavors. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the fishing industry of this province lobbied the federal government for years towards a proper capital gains tax exemption for passing on their fishing enterprises, and whereas the federal government promised this during the last election, where it then was brought before the House of Commons, but only in its first reading. Whereas it doesn't seem to be priority for the present federal government at this time. However, many of Nova Scotia fishermen are left waiting to transfer their fishing businesses to their sons. Therefore, be it resolved that this provincial government pressure their cousins in Ottawa for passage of Bill C-217 before we lose more young people to out-migration. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas music is a very important part of our lives, it brings joy to all who listen, and the music program at Charles P. Allen High School in Bedford is held in high esteem and holds many national awards. Whereas on November the 5th of this year, the music students of C.P. Allen, directed by Nathan Beeler, who holds a master's in music, presented an evening of entertainment with performances by the bass ensemble, drum corps, the concert band, jazz band, and symphonic band. And whereas these young musicians, under the artful direction of Nathan Beeler, performed some 16 arrangements showcasing their amazing talents, such as to the delight of hundreds of parents and staff. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize and congratulate the students and staff at Charles P. Allen High School in Bedford for the excellence they have achieved in the field of music in our school system. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Tuesday, September the 26th, 2006, Atlantic University Sports announced its weekly awards, and whereas Cape Breton University's Christina Weatherby captured the Female Athlete of the Week honors, and whereas Christina, a third-year striker, tallied 3 goals in 2 games, giving her a total of 6 goals in 6 games. Therefore, be it resolved the House of Assembly congratulate Christina Weatherby on her noteworthy athletic achievement and wish her continued success in the season ahead. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs had the privilege and honour of meeting and hearing from representatives from the Canadian Merchant Mariners Navy Veterans Association, Nova Scotia, and whereas these brave men and women experienced the horrors of war while fighting to protect the freedoms that all Canadians enjoy today, and whereas the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs of Nova Scotia approved a motion to send a formal request to our Federal Minister of Veterans Affairs asking the federal government to formally recognize the Canadian Merchant Mariners Navy veterans with a service medal, therefore be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly recognize the heroic sacrifice made by our Canadian Merchant Mariners Navy veterans and honor and reward them with the dignity, respect, and recognition they rightfully deserve. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas David Pears, a Truro native, is a 2006 inductee into the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame. Whereas David Pears was one of the finest tennis players ever produced in Nova Scotia, and among his achievements are 58 Nova Scotian Open crowns, 46 New Brunswick Open titles, and 21 Prince Edward Island championships. Whereas David Pears in 1958 was ranked #1 among players 18 and younger in Canada, and in 1988 he was inducted into the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate David Pears on his induction into the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame and wish him good health and continued success in the sport of tennis. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Muhammad Yunus, founder and managing director of the Grameen Bank and Nobel Prize laureate, will be in Halifax this month to host the Global Microcredit Summit. And whereas the Grameen Bank model of supplying small loans to people, primarily women, with no collateral or access to education or employment, has become a poverty reduction strategy used in more than 100 countries around the world. And whereas, according to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, 1 in 6 Nova Scotians is living in poverty, and as such, we clearly have much to learn from successful poverty reduction initiatives that empower underprivileged people to improve the economic and social conditions of their lives. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly welcome Dr. Yunus to Nova Scotia and strive to follow Dr. Yunus's leadership and commitment to poverty reduction at home and globally. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas full-service gas stations are disappearing from the landscape, and with this development, a large population of Nova Scotians have difficulty purchasing fuel for their vehicles, and whereas seniors and people with disabilities are often unable to pump their own gasoline, have their oil checked, or windshield washed, and whereas these citizens are perfectly capable of driving, but sometimes require a little extra help and are willing to pay for this service, therefore be resolved that members of the House of Assembly help to make Nova Scotia gas retailers aware of this matter and attentive to the difficulties some citizens encounter at the pump. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Women's Institute is a far-flung organization consisting of women living in rural areas across the province, promoting education, agriculture, community involvement, and the development of personal skills. And whereas Institute past president and Port Williams resident Ruth
Order,
Blankhorn.
please. Order, please. The clerks are having difficulty hearing the motion. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour, if you continue.
Whereas Institute past president and Port Williams resident Ruth Blankhorn played a significant role recently when the Nova Scotia Women's Institute issued a 6-part challenge asking people to buy local. And whereas Julia Llewellyn from the Lakeville Women's Institute in a recent newspaper article showed just how easy it was to buy local products. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this legislature commend the Nova Scotia Women's Institute for the challenge they issued, and to Ruth Blankhorn and Julia Llewellyn specifically for their active involvement in Institute activities and for the role they played in the Buy Local Challenge. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the triathlon is a relatively new sport in Nova Scotia and will be introduced into the Canada Games in 2009 in Prince Edward Island. And an introductory summer element of this sport is Kids of Steel. And whereas a young Queens County athlete, Graham Muse, placed second in his age category in his first provincial event, which garnered him an invitation to try out for the Nova Scotia Provincial Junior Triathlon team. And whereas Graham Muse placed first in his age category during the tryouts and earned a spot on the Provincial Junior team and placed first in his age group at the Shuby Park Triathlon, which was the Atlantic Regional Championship. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize and congratulate Graham Muse on his triathlon accomplishments in 2006. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. Honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the councillors from Halifax Regional Municipality have elected Sue Utek, councillor for Northwest Arms South End, as deputy mayor, and whereas Ms. Utek has represented her constituents since 1999 and is well known for her professionalism, leadership abilities, and determination to get the job done, and whereas Ms. Utek is the first woman deputy mayor in the history of HRM and is well recognized on council as a strong voice for her district and the concerns of the people of HRM, therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Halifax Regional Municipality's Deputy Mayor Sue Utek and wish her every success as she establishes herself in her new role. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dartmouth Historical Association instituted the Joseph Howe Fellowship Award to recognize outstanding people who have helped to preserve heritage, culture, or have been leaders in community services, and whereas the Joseph Howe Fellowship Award was presented to Barbara Hart, a well-recognized Dartmouth volunteer and community leader, and whereas Barbara Hart's community service included terms as Municipal Alderman and Deputy Mayor, Executive Director of the Metro Planned Parenthood Association, Dartmouth YMYWCA, Nova Scotia Head Injury Association, Chair of the Central Regional Health Board, and member of the Nova Scotia Advisory Committee on the Status of Women. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Dartmouth Historical Association and Barbara Hart on the occasion of her Joseph Howe Fellowship Award presentation and thank Barbara for her many contributions to the community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reg Knight never stops working for his community of Lower Prospect, and whereas this legendary seniors initiative and dedication are exemplary, whereas Reg Knight's efforts are an example for all of us to follow, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate and thank Reg Knight of Lower Prospect for his hard work to make his community of Lower Prospect a better place to live. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the North Nova Education Centre cross-country team is 36 students strong, with competitors in girls and boys senior and intermediate categories, and whereas provincial championships that were recently held in Bridgewater included teams from across the province with over 100 runners in each category, and whereas the intermediate boys team of Aaron Walsh, Zach McDonald, Thomas Gourd, and Kaylin Kinney won the provincial championship, thus winning the first provincial running banner in the history of North Nova Education Centre. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the North Nova Education Centre's immediate boys cross-country team for winning the provincial cross-country championship in October of 2006. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
It's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. Orders of the day, oral questions put by members. Question period will begin at 1:03 and end at 2:03. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Let's hope all the answers are that positive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today in St. John, New Brunswick, the National Energy Board is continuing to assess the proposal to build a 145-kilometre pipeline to Canaport LNG terminal. Nova Scotians have a keen interest in these proceedings, and their outcome, because of the decisions made by the NEB, will affect the viability of LNG terminals that are proposed for the Strait of Canso. It is being reported today, however, that the Deputy Minister of Energy has written off the $650 million Anadarko proposal by highlighting her department's support for the New Brunswick pipeline proposal. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy is why is he and his deputy written off the Anadarko project?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member across the way to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear today that our position as a government has not changed in relationship to that file. We're aggressively intervening. There's a process and a mechanism in place, Mr. Speaker, and we're doing what's necessary for the interests of Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it should be abundantly clear to any member of this House that thousands of Nova Scotia are leaving to find work in Alberta on a daily basis, and how the government put hundreds of jobs in jeopardy is beyond me, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess I want to ask a very straightforward question to this minister. It says that telephone conversation, there was minutes kept. Will you, Minister, table in this House today the minutes of that telephone conversation that was held by the Deputy Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that a conversation has taken place. I do have no knowledge, Mr. Speaker, of the minutes of that conversation.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, so I'll take that as a no. Mr. Speaker, it was clearly reported that was a fact, and I don't know whether the minister is completely out of the loop on this one. Mr. Speaker, people in the Strait have had a tough enough year with layoffs at EDS, the lockout at Stora, now this, Mr. Speaker. They don't need any more of this put on them. When will this minister do the right thing and get serious about an energy policy for this province? When are you going to do it, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, the member knows that this government takes energy issues very seriously. Mr. Speaker, I just stood in my place minutes ago, Mr. Speaker, and made an announcement about Encana. If that doesn't please that member, I don't know what would. Thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars for Nova Scotians because of the direction of this government, and that's the premise that we stand on, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, this is the same Minister of Energy who's publicly quoted as saying he feared the wind was going to stop blowing. So I think Nova Scotians all know how serious this minister and this government truly is about energy. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, the Minister of Energy himself stood in this House and quite loudly, in fact, stated that his department would be defending the interests of Nova Scotians at the National Energy Board hearing concerning the proposed New Brunswick Bullet Pipeline. Mr. Speaker, however, we've come to find out that 3 days before the hearing began, the Deputy Minister of Energy, during a telephone conference call, said that the province would be supporting the proposed $350 million New Brunswick pipeline as the best hope of getting more natural gas in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, it appears that the front put up by the Department of Energy that they would fight against the New Brunswick Bullet Pipeline was a mere facade. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that this morning, in light of the importance of this issue, that the Minister would have had the opportunity to question his Deputy Minister on this. So my question to the Minister is, can you confirm to the House today the accuracy of the comments attributed to your Deputy, Alison Scott, in today's press?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, the member across the way, the interim leader of the Liberal Party, continues to make reference about a comment that I regrettably said that was taken out of context, and I would like to clear that up. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the House for an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to address this issue, because that member continuously wastes the time of Nova Scotians in regard to this comment. Mr. Speaker, before I read from this document produced by Dalhousie University, Marine and Environmental Law Institute, and I read, Mr. Speaker, I won't read the whole thing, but it makes reference, and Mr. Speaker, I'm going to answer the member's questions if you would give me an opportunity. I'm just taking this reference from this document in which I'm going to table. Mr. Speaker, it talks about credits and so on, but it says, what will we do? It will be necessary to store power for when the wind does not blow, possibly using hydrogen. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to deliver that, and maybe that will put that statement to rest, because, Mr. Speaker, people...
Mike's off. Order, 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 order. Order, please. I would note for those that were protesting, the mic was shut off by the chair. So, the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the embarrassment continues. First of all, after the Minister's comments, refusing to answer the question put to him today about a most serious matter involving a Deputy Minister who's very well paid by the taxpayers of this province. Mr. Speaker, the spokesman for Anadarko expressed his displeasure with the government and was quoted as saying, last week the government was saying something different, and now the province may be pulling back and not as supportive. Mr. Speaker, his displeasure clearly stems from the Deputy Minister's comments during the conference call that the Canaport LNG terminal has a better chance of getting supply than the proposed Anadarko plant at Bear Head, Richmond County. So my question to the Minister again, do you stand behind the comments attributed to Alison Scott, your Deputy Minister, in today's paper, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, the position of this government is clear, and I stand behind the position of this government. It's to advance the offshore, Mr. Speaker. It's to advance LNG plants. It's to create revenues for the good people of Nova Scotia, and I make that clear to the members across the way, and I stand strong on my position today that the reason why we're here, Mr. Speaker, is to create opportunities for Nova Scotia, and our position hasn't changed.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is the same Minister of Energy during the last session when we asked him about the details surrounding the actual hiring of Heather Foley-Melvin at Conserve Nova Scotia under his department. His answer was, don't ask me, I didn't hire her, the Premier did. So he didn't even know the details back then. Today he won't even tell us what Alison Scott said, yes or no, that's attributed to the press. Mr. Speaker, the press today is having a chilling effect throughout not only our province, but throughout the entire energy industry when we have a Deputy Minister of Energy that has apparently given up on the LNG industry here in Nova Scotia. So once again, Minister, Did Alison Scott make the comments attributed to her in today's paper about supporting the LNG pipeline in New Brunswick?
The Honourable, the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear. Our position in regards to this issue, in regards to the hearing that's taking place in St. John's today, our position is clear, Mr. Speaker. We're there to advance the position of Nova Scotians. And, Mr. Speaker, that is our position.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is going to be for the Minister of Health through you. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to begin by tabling a briefing note that was received through a Freedom of Information request. The briefing note explains the timelines and mandate for the $1 million contract awarded to Corpus Sanchez for the so-called Provincial Health Services Operational Review. The promised release of the final report from that review was the end of September or the first week of October. Well, Mr. Speaker, here we are in the second week of November, so I'm going to ask the Minister of Health through you, will you now table the Corpus Sanchez final report on their Provincial Health Services Operational Review?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And at this point, we do not have a report. We are anticipating to see that report in the very near future, and I will look forward to sharing that with all Nova Scotians once that comes in.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'll now table messages received from the same Freedom of Information request sent to CEOs and board chairs by the Director of Communications at the Minister's Department. The messages confirm that the final provincial report from Corpus Sanchez is expected at the end of the month. Very convenient, Mr. Speaker, after the House is likely to have risen. However, many of the district reports were to be forwarded to the Department of Health over the past few weeks. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Health is, will the Minister table the individual district reports submitted by Corpus Sanchez?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as you know, we are still undertaking this facilities review, looking at the whole system as it stands, looking at all the district health authorities and how they care for Nova Scotians and how they expend the dollars of taxpayers of Nova Scotia. As soon as the report is complete, I'll be more than happy to share it with the member. At this point, nothing has been received by my office.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has referred to this as a process where everything is on the table. According to the notes, these reports have gone out to the district health authorities, despite the fact that his department has never publicly disclosed the award of the Corpus Sanchez tender in the first place, and despite promising a final report in late September, she also failed to disclose until today that the report would be delayed for another 2 months. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is this. When this is all being conducted with the use of public money, why are you continuing to hold back so much information from the public?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all Nova Scotians that we're in this process to look at how taxpayers' dollars are being spent in the health system. We are looking at all programs and services to make sure that they are done in a safe and good manner. We're making sure that all things within the district health authorities are being done correctly, making sure that we have programs provincially that are responding to the needs of Nova Scotians. And through that process, I look forward to furthering discussions on improving health care for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of the Health through you. I'd like to now table a PowerPoint presentation regarding the Provincial Health Services Operational Review, which was used at a cabinet briefing on September 28th. Mr. Speaker, this presentation was obtained through a Freedom of Information request. However, out of the 7-page presentation, your department has withheld 3 pages and 2 partial pages. Please note that removed are the majority of both the key facts and the key principles sections. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is a very simple one. Which of the key facts and principles in your approach to healthcare privatization are you hiding from the public?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all Nova Scotians, as well as all members in this House, that we are not hiding anything. We are making sure that we have all the information available and all the key assumptions are there, and making sure that our government is comfortable with the information held therein, and making sure that it is available to all Nova Scotians when that report is available.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, didn't disclose the tender of the contract, didn't disclose the information on which the review was being done. So now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to table an outline of the agreement between the government and Corpus Sanchez. The agreement is valid from March 15, 2006 to September 30, 2006, and clearly Corpus Sanchez has not met the terms of the agreement. Clause 3.6 says that the agreement can only be extended by mutual written consent. So my question for the Minister is this: will the Minister table the letter and the terms of the extension of this $1 million contract?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, throughout this process, it has been one that has been a long one, making sure that we have the correct information from all district health authorities to make sure that we can have the information available to us to ensure safe and equitable health care for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my question was about public money being used on the Corpus Sanchez contract. It was originally a $1 million contract. According to the FOI, there are upwards of 15 Corpus Sanchez team members working on the project. Mr. Speaker, that's a lot of salary, that's a lot of travel, that's a lot of public money that the public of Nova Scotia has a right to know is being spent. So my final question to the Minister is this: will the Minister tell the House what penalty, if any, will be levied against Corpus Sanchez for being almost 2 months behind with their report, or if there is to be no penalty, what cost increases will the taxpayers see?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, there are reasons why time to time government departments need to look at the system and how they are delivering services for all Nova Scotians. We will continue to work with, of course, Corpus Sanchez and other groups as we require information. And I look forward to sharing the information held therein in the very near future.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians know that Tory times are hard times, and no statement could be truer for the people of the Strait area. Mr. Speaker, earlier today we learned that the Deputy Minister of Energy has all but abandoned any hopes for an LNG facility in Point Tupper. And last month we also heard in Port Hawkesbury that the EDS call centre was downgrading and restructuring. At the time it was announced that 160 jobs would be relocating to Sydney. But out of 500 jobs, at least 150 would be staying at the Port Hawkesbury location. Well, yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we heard that the centre will be closing down completely, and 160 jobs transferring to Sydney and leaving hundreds of people out of work and wondering what to do next. Mr. Speaker, through all of this, we have yet to hear one word from this government. My question to the Premier is, when did you become aware that EDS would be completely shutting down its call centre in Port Hawkesbury?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, EDS has been a very good employer in the Strait area, as they have been in the Sydney area, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure that member and all members, Mr. Speaker, and Nova Scotians, that we continue to work to ensure that we see another good quality employer go in its place. And the discussions have been ongoing, Mr. Speaker. No different than we saw success in Liverpool. I have every confidence to believe that we will see success going into this centre as well.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my question was very specific to the Premier about when did he become aware the centre would completely shut down, and as we all know, he completely failed to answer that question. Well, Mr. Speaker, this call centre has certainly received its fair share of funding from government-run agencies and departments. In 2002, the call centre received $2.5 million from the Cape Breton Growth Fund and $2 million from Enterprise Cape Breton Corporation. In 2004, the call center wanted to expand and received an additional $2.1 million from the Cape Breton Growth Fund and another $2.1 million from Nova Scotia Business Incorporated. Mr. Speaker, the total for this call center is $8.7 million in public funds, and now they're about to close down their operations in the Premier's own riding, which has an impact on the entire Strait area. So my question again to the Premier is, what efforts did you undertake to keep those much-needed jobs in Port Hawkesbury before the announcement to completely close down that centre?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, a number of conversations have taken place with EDS regarding the jobs there and the centre there, Mr. Speaker. As I said, already ongoing discussions with other potential companies to come in its place have started. The two great things, Mr. Speaker, we see with the centre there, we have obviously a building, but more importantly, we have well-trained individuals. We have highly trained individuals who are able to move directly into new jobs when they do come about. Now, I didn't hear that member, Mr. Speaker, speaking out against the investments government was making when he was standing there when we were opening the call center. I didn't hear that member speaking out against those jobs when we made the announcements, because it was the progressive conservative government that put those jobs there in the first place, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's the progressive conservatives that put the jobs there, and it's the progressive conservatives that are going to watch them go away, is what's going to happen in this case, Mr. Speaker. $8.7 million to keep jobs there was a good announcement. To maintain the jobs is a whole different thing. That centre has been in operation for less than 4 years, and now it's completely closing, and the jobs are leaving. Mr. Speaker, not only are they leaving, many are being transferred to Sydney, out of the Strait area, more out-migration for our community. The question that I had asked earlier, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, when did he become aware that EDS was going to close that centre, which would give us an idea of when the government knew and what plans they had to try to convince EDS to keep those jobs in that community. So my final supplementary, again, is, what plan does the Premier have that he can provide this House today that he's going to put in place to replace the loss of hundreds of jobs in his riding and in the Strait area?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister of Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I can also tell the member and all members of the House that company had targets it had to meet, and he met those targets. And he only got the payroll rebate as it met the targets for the job creation. They are a great employer in this province, Mr. Speaker. They have another facility in this great province of ours with a numerous amount of jobs. But I can also tell that member and all members of the House, we do have staff that's on this file, and they are working with that company and other companies to make sure that there's no void in that community and that we can have a suitable replacement when they decide that they will be closing down completely.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in the Public Accounts Committee, we heard some interesting and disturbing testimony about the government's corporate financial management computer system. The Auditor General has issued a very strong, and if I may say, Mr. Speaker, very harsh judgment about the system's security. The Auditor General says there are, quote, significant, persistent, fundamental control weaknesses, end of quote. That's very strong language coming from an office that is usually known for very carefully couching its comments. My question to the Minister, what is the government doing to address these significant, persistent, fundamental control problems?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you. I'd refer that to the Minister of Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I watched part of the debate on Wednesday with Public Accounts, and I can assure that all members of this House that we are investing very wisely for long-term support to have the proper systems in place for all of our boards and commissions in this province. And if you look, Mr. Speaker, the system that we have here in the provincial We have over 30,000 employees onto that system and not one problem since in the year 2005, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview on your first supplementary.
It's odd, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in public accounts, the director of the Office of Economic Development threw all these questions over to the Deputy Minister of Finance, saying it was her responsibility. And here today, the Minister of Finance saying it's not his responsibility, it's economic development. Maybe we're getting a glimpse of part of the problem here. What should cause the most concern about the Auditor General's comments is that some of these security issues were first identified in an audit in 1998, and they have still not been addressed. For example, the Auditor General has identified the inappropriate use of powerful access privileges as the root cause of the security problems. The software vendor, one of the largest and most experienced financial software vendors in the world, says these privileges should never be used except in an emergency, but the Nova Scotia Department of Finance says that it knows better. My question to the Minister, when will the Minister of Finance order his department to clean up its security procedures and heed the repeated warnings from the Auditor General?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, and I would refer the matter to the Minister of Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are making investments to make sure that we have greater accountability, better service, improved efficiencies, better access, and timely and consistent information, Mr. Speaker. We're making wise investments for the future of Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General has more to say. He says it is, quote, vital. He says it is, quote, essential that these security flaws be fixed before the system is rolled out any further. Yet we are now only 7 weeks away from this flawed system being rolled out to the regional school boards, and plans are well underway to extend it also to the district health authorities. My question to the Minister, whichever Minister wants to take responsibility for this, why is the Minister going to take a system with significant, persistent, fundamental control problems and expand it to tens of thousands more employees before the problems are fixed?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question because I'd like to quote the Auditor General saying himself on CBC News on November 8, 2006. The comments that we've made on the whole system has been overall favorable for the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Health. Yesterday, the Minister of Health referred to an election promise for nursing home beds in the Middleton area as election propaganda, Mr. Speaker. I give full credit to the Minister for acknowledging that his government was willing to promise nursing home beds to anyone to get their votes, Mr. Speaker. There is a vast divide between promising and delivering those beds, Mr. Speaker. So I asked the Minister of Health today, why won't his government deliver on its promises for the badly needed nursing home beds that we need in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, if there's words you can pull back, I think that'd be one of them. But let's say literature, campaign literature. Is probably what I was looking for. But Mr. Speaker, I think through the continuing care strategy, we're working hard. I know staff is working extremely hard, making sure we have the rollout for the new beds, the new 826 beds across the system. And I look forward to again taking my place and announcing the RFPs for those bed constructions across Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health continues to say in the near future, very near future, Mr. Speaker. We need those beds today. We needed those beds yesterday, Mr. Speaker. So while this government plays political games with the nursing home beds, seniors in our communities across this province are waiting, Mr. Speaker. They're waiting in hospital beds. They're waiting in transitional units. They're waiting in their homes, Mr. Speaker, for months and months. So my question to the Minister of Health today, how much longer is his government going to make the seniors of our province wait for the care they so badly need, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Speaker, and throughout this process, it has been a very time-consuming one, making sure that we're making the right decisions, making sure that we put the right type of beds in the right places. And Mr. Speaker, I know over the last number of weeks that there's been a tremendous effort being made by the department staff in concert with district health authorities and other groups to make sure that we put those beds in the right place the first time.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government took 5 years, Mr. Speaker, to finally get a site selection done for the 150 desperately needed nursing home beds in the Bedford-Sackville area, Mr. Speaker. This project is still progressing slowly while our seniors continue to wait, Mr. Speaker. So my final question to the Minister of Health today, what assurances can he offer Middleton and Barrington that they won't have to wait as long as the citizens of Bedford and Sackville for their nursing homes, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can say that process was one that did take far too long, and I know that the department did learn from those experiences, and that kind of process will not happen again.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, during the last election, this government reverted back to the old Tory ways of trying to convince people to vote for them through an array of promises. And Mr. Speaker, yesterday, well, stay tuned, it gets better. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health confirmed this during question period, where he said a commitment to create long-term care beds in the Valley was just election propaganda. My question to the Minister, and I'll table that document answered. My question to the Premier, Speaker, is does the Premier agree with his Minister that during campaigns the promises made are nothing more than election propaganda?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the issue in question is a very serious issue, dealing with long-term care beds. There are many individuals in our province who are awaiting these beds. Mr. Speaker, I can assure that member that the Valley, like all other parts of the province, will be treated fairly in the process when beds go out for proposals. And Mr. Speaker, I can assure that member and all Nova Scotians that will be going out within the near future.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, not only did the Minister of Health admit on the floor of this legislature that the campaign promise was nothing more than propaganda, he said in so many words that if a Tory had been elected, that promise would have been kept. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, does the Premier agree with the Minister's belief that voters should be threatened during a campaign, that if they don't vote his way, then promises won't be kept?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, first of all, I disagree with the members, Mr. Speaker. I disagree with the member what he's suggesting that the minister said. Mr. Speaker, what I will say is that the minister and the department are very committed to seeing those beds go out for requests for proposals, and we will see those beds. The government has made a commitment, Mr. Speaker, and the government will keep its commitments.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Now the Premier disagrees with Hansard. Mr. Speaker, on a related matter and involving the same kind of situation, the failed candidate in Cape Breton South, Scott Boyd, who is now the latest occupant in the patronage appointments in the Cabinet Office in Sydney, and the latest occupant that member has caught the spirit of giving during the election campaign, Mr. Speaker. That member went to a senior citizens club in Point Edward and announced a $15 million grant from the province of Nova Scotia to put a new roof on the Pensioners Club in Point Edward. Now, since then, Mr. Speaker, and it was approved by you, Mr. Premier, according to the pensioners of that club. Now, Mr. Speaker, following that announcement, I received a call from the president of the Pensioners Club in Point Edward, who told me that an agreement had been reached by Mr. Boyd during the election campaign with his senior citizens. Now, I called the department involved, and they said that there's no such an agreement and no agreement to pay $15,000 for a roof for the pensioners of Point Edward. Mr. Speaker, I would add my question to the Premier is simply this. You know, was Scott Boyd telling the truth? Did you tell him, Mr. Premier, that you were going to give him $15,000 for that roof, or was that more election propaganda?
The Honourable the Premier.
15,000, 15 million. Now I know he should admit maybe he was the Minister of Finance during the last Liberal government.
The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to say that I regret to have to get up to ask a question for support for the hog industry, and the reason I have to do that is because of the failure of this government to have any long-term vision to take care of agriculture in this province. Mr. Speaker, it used to be once upon a time that the hog industry would be in difficulty, but then there'd be good times and bad times. There'd be this bit of a roller coaster, but they've flatlined on bad for some years with no help. Now, due to these consecutive bad years, the CASE program isn't going to work for them, and there is supposed to be a working group that's looking at long-term solutions, and I think maybe some people from the Minister's Department are involved in that, and it's scheduled to make recommendations hopefully in March. And when or if those recommendations would be acted on remains to be seen. So what we do know that if there is no short-term funding provided for these family operations, they're going to be gone, Mr. Speaker, and they're going to be gone soon. So my question to the Minister, is the Minister willing to provide short-term transitional funding to pork producers until a long-term solution can be provided?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would as well thank the honourable member for the question. And the member is quite correct. The hog industry, and in fact many of our agriculture commodities in the province of Nova Scotia, are going through some very challenging times. Yes. There's concerns relative to pricing, there's concerns relative to production and processing, especially in the hog sector. And yes, this government and the Department of Agriculture have put together a committee of industry and agriculture to try to assist the hog industry and in fact other sectors in working from where they are today to get to a long-term strategy. And we firmly believe that you can't keep throwing money at different sectors in the province just to help them out in the short term. We want to work with that commodity to put in place something that will be long-term and something that will be viable, feasible, and sustainable.
The Honourable Member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think the hog producers would agree with the Minister that you can't keep doing that. They don't want you to keep doing that. They want a long-term strategy, but they're not even going to be around to enjoy a long-term strategy unless they get some short-term help, and I mean right away, Mr. Speaker. So this support is needed to allow producers to maintain their farms in the interim until that long-term solution is found. I'll table a copy of a letter from Dennis Boudreau that was sent to all government caucus members dated October 23rd. And since the Minister would have already seen this letter, I ask him, what is your response to Dennis Boudreau and all other hog producers in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the honourable member had an opportunity just this week, as did I, to attend a meeting in his constituency where the Halifax Hants East Federation of Agriculture held their AGM. And we were made very well aware of the challenges that the agriculture community is facing. But more specific, the members referencing the hog sector and pork industry, and there's no doubt in this member's mind, in this minister's mind, that we have to look at some short-term funding to help the pork industry get to some sort of long-term strategy. But I have to be responsible to all taxpayers in this province, and this government must be responsible, and any help and assistance must be based on that long-term strategy. And the pork industry in Nova Scotia is doing a lot of good work, but the committee that we have established is working towards those goals and those objectives, Mr. Speaker. We're working very, very hard on behalf of the hog industry in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind all members in this legislature, friendly, mind you, that the farmers feed us all. They feed us all. And as a proud product of a dairy farm in the Musquodoboit Valley, I can tell you that I am very, very concerned, and this government is very concerned about agriculture.
The honourable member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. That and $1.50 will get you a cup of coffee at Tim Hortons. Usually the government ministers will allow a little time between flip-flops, but that minister can do it all in one answer. Mr. Speaker, since 1999, I've listened to that member, who is now a minister, talk about his desire to be at the cabinet table. He wanted to be a minister, and anybody in this House would have known that. Well, now he's there, and he's supposed to be the voice for agriculture in this province. So my question, Mr. Speaker, after 7 years of talking the talk, Minister, are you going to finally walk the walk and provide some help for Nova Scotia hog producers? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, that member's unusually exercised here today. And I do know, look, it is a serious issue, and the member is very sincere. Look, I'm not going to go there at all, but I can tell you this, that under the leadership of Premier Rodney MacDonald, this government made a separate Department of Agriculture and put a minister in place to dedicate themselves to the concerns in the industry. Mr. Speaker, I attended several meetings with the Pork Nova Scotia folks. Just last Friday night, the Maritime Conference was held down at the Westin. Mr. Speaker, we know the challenges. This government knows the challenges, but we are not simply going to throw money at a problem without having some conditions in place. I can tell that member that.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Agriculture.
All Brook all the time.
Mr. Speaker, Pork Nova Scotia has taken the initiative. As the member knows, they put in front of him a short-term strategy to deal with the hog industry in Nova Scotia. He knows that it's in front of him. No more planning needs to take place. So my question to the minister is, when are you prepared to deal with the short-term strategy that the hog producers have put in front of you?
Do a committee.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. And again, I want to point out that this government has and will continue to assist sector groups. We want to help them develop strategies. We want to help them put in place a long-term plan that will greatly assist pork industry here in Nova Scotia. There's no doubt about that. And I should remind that member that this government has put in $10 million over the last 4 years to help the hog industry in Nova Scotia. Over $10 million. And you know what? There still are pricing challenges. There still are processing challenges. There still are production challenges. We recognize that. But we're working with the hog industry. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope that in time, in the very short future, we will be able to assist. But what we do is provide responsible government.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members of this side of the House are well aware because we're the ones that forced you to invest that money. The problem with it is, quite frankly, Mr. Minister, the problem with it, Mr. Minister, is the industry is asking for a life-saving line, not an anchor. And what you're doing is putting an anchor around their neck. They put in front of you a plan to deal with the short-term issue they faced with a long-term strategy. What they're looking for from you, from this government is leadership. When will you deal with this issue and put in place that strategy that's in front of you?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, this government is working with the hog sector, that very important industry to agriculture in the province of Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to point out again, and it's not just true for the hog industry, although the honourable member is speaking about the hog industry, we believe that there has to be major and fundamental change in the pork sector, and we're working towards that. We're working towards that with the hog industry in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The industry has been telling you now for a year there has to be a fundamental change in the industry. They put the plan in front of you to make that change. What they require from you is some financial assistance. Here, here. Mr. Speaker, there's 450 jobs at the Larson plants in Berwick which are in jeopardy. As we sit and wait, this industry will not be around, Mr. Minister, if we don't deal with this issue now. So my question is, will you commit now to deal with this issue immediately and implement that short-term strategy with long-term solutions in place?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I guess you're permitted to repeat yourself in the legislature. This government, this minister, the Department of Agriculture is working diligently with the hog industry in the province of Nova Scotia and will continue to work with the hog industry in Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to be responsible, not only to the hog sector, not only to the cattle sector, not only to the dairy sector, not only to the blueberry growers, not only to the mink producers. We have to be responsible to all Nova Scotia taxpayers.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is preparing to expand the quarantine zone for the brown spruce longhorn beetle. This is going to have a direct impact on the areas that will now be included. The larger zone is reported to include Halifax County, the southeast corner of Hants County, and the southwest corner of Colchester County. My question is, what is this government intending to do to help woodlot owners in the proposed new quarantine zone?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite for the question. It's certainly a pertinent question. Mr. Speaker, very proud with the work done by my predecessor in this department and working with the affected woodlot owners. And, Mr. Speaker, of course, we will continue to work with them. As the member pointed out, this is a decision that is going to be made by a federal agency, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and we continue to work with the woodlot owners in anticipation of their decision.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, containing the beetle appears to be a difficult task. The measures taken in the past seem to have failed. The province carried out an aid program for those inside the previous quarantine zone and must have taken part in monitoring. My question, Mr. Speaker, is what did this government know about the spread of the beetle and when did they know it?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, of course, the actual control and the establishment of the quarantine zone is the responsibility of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. We continue to work with them and as best we can, and we look forward to continuing to work with the Woodlot Owners Association.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there's clearly a provincial role here. Mr. Speaker, we all know how the woodlot owners in the current quarantine zone have suffered. A program was created to help these woodlot owners, but people like Bill Kazavecki, an 88-year-old veteran in Cole Harbour, are still waiting. My question for the minister is how much money is left in the program, and when can people like Bill Kazavecki expect to be helped?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member makes reference to the program that was put in place by my predecessor in the department. And, Mr. Speaker, the harvesting of the infected woodlot within the quarantine zone is driven, of course, by the demand for chips. Neenah paper, of course, is the primary market for them, and because of the slowdown in the pulp and paper industry over the last year, it has somewhat diminished the activity in that area. But of course, with the reopening of Stora, the demand for chips is increasing again, and we look forward to more work being done within the quarantine zone.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Environment and Labour. Mr. Speaker, it's been 3 years now since the Supreme Court threw out the existing legislation on chronic pain. But since then, Nova Scotia Workers' Compensation Board has done nothing to mitigate the circumstances for chronic pain clients. Thousands of people, Mr. Speaker, in our province are sitting on waiting lists, waiting for decisions that will help them pay for the treatment and will help them with their financial suffering. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, why have you not found a definition of chronic pain that meets the needs of injured workers in this province?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Workmen's Compensation Board, as the honourable member would know, has been working diligently in response to the Supreme Court decision. Looking at who's entitled to chronic pain compensation. They've hired extra staff, Mr. Speaker, to look into this, and they're on track with the timeline they set out for themselves.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Workers' Compensation Board has divided those who suffer with chronic pain into two groups, those who were injured before the Hayden Court decision and those injured afterwards. Now, each group is being treated differently by the government. Those who were injured before the Hayden case receive less compensation than those injured since that date. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister if he would explain why his government hasn't developed policy that will ensure that all chronic pain sufferers are treated fairly and receive wage loss replacements.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Workmen's Compensation Board has looked at the pre- and post-Hayden groups and concluded that no further adjustment is necessary in that regard, but there may be further adjustments made with the new ACT group, and so that they're looking at that presently.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to point out that it hasn't been the Workmen's Compensation Board for some time now, since there are lots of women that are working in our labour force. Mr. Speaker, the Workers' Compensation Board is still discriminating against pre-charter chronic pain claims. The regulations state that pre-charter injuries should be compensated. The Workers' Compensation Board policy says the opposite. The board of the Workers' Compensation Program say they needed a year to deal with this issue. Well, Mr. Speaker, the year is almost up and nothing has been done. So my final question for the Minister is this. Why have you allowed people to suffer chronic pain and financial hardship for so long?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the Workmen's Compensation Board is looking at their policy. Workers' Compensation Board is looking at the policy right now, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Workers' Compensation Board has a new governance structure that's been put in place. In that governance structure, there are stakeholders who make decisions for employers and for employees, and they're making that decision and doing a good job of it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we were given the final numbers regarding the amount of retailers who have signed on to gas regulation in our province and those who haven't. As suspected all along, the vast majority of retailers in Nova Scotia overwhelmingly opted out of gas regulation. Only 55% of the independents and only 32% of the total amount of retailers thought gas regulation would be good for their business. This Premier brought in gas regulation for two reasons. One was to save retailers, and one was to provide stability. Mr. Speaker, we certainly haven't seen stability, and 68% of retailers have said no to regulation. So my question to the Premier is, when will you admit that gas regulation has been a failure in the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we have said very clearly, we will be doing a review on gas regulation. We put gas regulation in place for the issue of stability for consumers, Mr. Speaker, and I believe it has certainly done its job in that regard. But, Mr. Speaker, we look forward to the review.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, not only are the actual retailers deciding to opt out of the regulated market, but we can now also put a dollar figure on how much regulation has cost residents of our province. A recent Gardner Pinfold and M.J. Irvin Government Commission study said regulation would cost consumers $10 to $20 million more each year. The system has been a complete failure in this province, and yet the Premier refuses to admit that they made a bad public policy decision. Therefore, my question again is, Premier, the people of this province, both consumers and retailers, clearly don't want regulation. Therefore, will you commit to them today that it will be removed immediately?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, the government has made a commitment to do a review, to take a look at all of the pertinent information, so that for all Nova Scotians to see, and take a look at the issues of stability, take a look at the issues of prices on consumers and the impact there, and also, Mr. Speaker, to see the impact on our retailers. Now, I don't see anything wrong with that, Mr. Speaker. I think it's the responsible thing to do, and I find it difficult to believe that the Liberal Party would have a problem with doing an appropriate independent review. And you know, if they do, Mr. Speaker, that is something they'll have to answer to, but I believe it is the responsible thing to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're the party that's forcing a review after 6 months, but we were hoping that now that all of the evidence is in, that the Premier would have been able to show leadership and make a decision on this without having to cost taxpayers another review when the facts clearly show that regulation has not met the objectives that had been set out with the support of the NDP. But Mr. Speaker, the Premier put the taxpayers of this province on the hook for far too long. They are admittedly forcing consumers to pay for the administration of regulation, to pay for higher gas prices, and to pay for the lack of investment in the years to come if regulation continues. Speaker, retailers are collectively saying no to regulation, and some are actually being cut off their supply of petroleum products, as we pointed out last week. And with the recent cut in the motor fuel tax in New Brunswick, gas prices under regulation are remaining higher in Nova Scotia than in our competing province.